we've called on the President to urgently appoint a permanent head of the NPA so that institution can begin to restore its public credibility.
Now, one of the things that you've raised with regards to your court challenge is the issue of undue political pressure. Now, this crisis that you say exists because of lack of leadership, is it a matter of perception, or is it indeed, can we categorically and factually say there is proof that the lack of a permanent head is having an impact on the prosecution by the NPA?
Well, I think, if we take, for example, the Batenbach case as an example, there isn't, one cannot say that there is, irrefutable evidence of political influence, but certainly the suspicion is there, and it's more than just a passing suspicion. It's a grave one, in that Advocate Batenbach was suspended, faced 15 different disciplinary charges, was acquitted on all of them. And yet, the minute she was acquitted, the NPA said that they were going to review their very own internal disciplinary process, and now we hear that they're bringing a range of other charges against her. And even though she's been allowed to return to work, not to her previous position, but to a different job, she has been prevented from pursuing the Richard Mluli matter. So this certainly leads to a perception in the mind of the public that attempts are being made to protect certain powerful individuals.
My beef with the NPA is that their interpretation of their discretion to prosecute or not is much, they are interpreting it in a very wide manner, in a manner that I would actually suggest is unconstitutional. My reading of the Constitution is that there is a duty to prosecute where there is a prima facie case and there is no compelling reason not to prosecute. And we're seeing again and again cases where there is evidence, but for some reason the NPA declines to prosecute. And if we look at the number of verdicts that we're getting out of the NPA, despite a huge number of increase in resources, if we go back to 2002, 2003, we're looking at around 450,000. We're now down to 350,000 a year. This is despite a massive increase in the number of prosecutors, the number of resources that are being given to the NPA. What's also of concern is the increasing length of time which accused people spend in custody, and then ultimately the case is withdrawn after they have spent some time in custody. And if we look at the Neen Boyson case, that's exactly what happened. Again, perhaps we can't blame the NPA in that situation. The police should have been quicker in excluding that person from custody, but he spent 4 months in custody. If we look at the Andries Tatani case, in fact, what's most concerning about the Andries Tatani case is how few cases where the ICD, now the IPID, has recommended a prosecution are actually prosecuted. Data amassed by my colleagues Lucas Munting and Gwenel Derrymaker show that around 500 cases per year are referred for prosecution where people have died as a result of police action or in police custody. And what we're looking at is fewer than 100 per year are actually charged, and fewer still are actually convicted each year. And that's a cause for real concern.
Advocate Abrams, how would you respond to that?
Thank you, Tsapiso. I'd like to respond to Lawson Naidu's statements first and foremost. I think it's important to understand that, with regards to firstly the independence of the NPA, whether there's political influence, etc., and the issue of the president not having appointed a permanent head, that should not remotely infer that the NPA is not fulfilling its mandate. We merely just need to look at the statistics of the NPA over the last year, over the last 2 years or so, since Advocate Jiba has been the acting NDPP. Our statistics has increased insofar as convictions are concerned and verdicts are concerned. In fact, to be specific,
that's simply not true.
To be specific, that increased by 1.9%. And in our most recent annual report, which obviously will be submitted, to the powers that be, in future, all that is clearly set out.
How
So we're
true
fi-
is that? Ms. Redpath, I can hear her objecting to your statement. Now, in a report to Parliament in April this year, you made it clear that your state of your finances is in disarray, and you also reported a downward trend, saying that it is actually impeding you against doing your job, that those who are mostly affected are the poorest of the poor in their bid to access justice. So can you truly say that the performance is still the same as in the past 2 years?
Well, it's actually improved. The statistics speak for themselves. I do confirm that the lack of resources has somewhat hampered the performance of the NPA, so much so that we would have actually performed much better had we had more finances, had we had more resources, had we been in a position to appoint more prosecutors in respective areas.
Ms. Redpath, why do you say that's also not
it's
true?
simply not true. The analysis which I did in the monograph which you referred to earlier shows that the burden on the NPA per prosecutor is not overwhelming. And in fact, the number of prosecutors has increased remarkably since 2002, 2003. What has also improved over the last 5 or 6 years is the vacancy rate. There used to be quite a high vacancy rate. That has also gone down. The amount of money that has been spent on the NPA has also increased. So to say that a lack of resources is the cause of the decreasing trend, certainly I'm not privy to 2013 data, but certainly the trend, even in the last, from 2010, 2011 to 2011, 2012, is towards a decrease in the number of verdicts. And even if we look at prison data, the number of people being sent to prison for a sentence has decreased from, in around 2003, there were something like 80,000 per year, and now we're looking at around a half or a third of that amount per year. So really, on any measure that you look at, for serious crime, we are seeing a decreasing trend. We're seeing an increase in resources, increase in the number of prosecutors. So it's simply not true to say that.
But how true is it that there is an increase in resources? And we're also talking staff content here, because according to the NPA, some of the programs that they've put in place to train recruits, for instance, that they had a pilot project that's been shelved because of lack of funding, that there's low staff morale because of a high caseload that those who've been in the system for so long can't handle, and they don't even have people who can help them with some of these cases. Ms. Redpath?
Oh, you're referring the question to me. Look, I certainly think that morale is a huge problem in the NPA. If we look at the number of court hours that our courts and our NPA are able to work each year, that's decreasing. We're looking at around 3 hours a day that our courts are actually working. That's a lot of hours that we could be using to better effect. I think that the upheavals that the NPA have experienced going back to Bulelani Luka's time have certainly had an impact on morale. When you see what's happening to Glynis Breitenbach, you can quite understand that the best and the brightest would feel quite careful about how they proceed in the decisions they make from a political perspective. And that can all have an impact on how work is done within the NPA.
We're going to take a quick break and take calls in just a moment. But before we do that, I'd like to come back to you, Mr. Naidu.
Yes.
Can we really say that the NPA is on a slippery slope to nowhere? If we look at figures of March 2012, I mean, they had a conviction rate of 88%. They were ahead of their cases in some cases. So is it perhaps a financial constraint thing that is impacting on the quality of the work that they do, that Mr. Abrams says, but Ms. Redpath seems to argue with?
Well, I think, the one point that we must bear in mind is that these financial constraints that are being faced, the lack of filling of staff vacancies, the scrapping of the aspirant prosecutors program, these are issues that are going to affect the NPA in time to come, because we'll see the impact of that in the years to come. So whilst one must commend the conviction rates at the moment, although there will be some debate about how those rates are measured, but I think broadly one must commend that. but the impact of the crisis of leadership will be felt in the years to come. On the point that Advocate Abrams made about that one mustn't look at the issue of the failure to appoint a head as critical to the NPA, I'm afraid that it is very critical, because one of the most important criteria for looking at the independence of the head of the NDPP is the issue of security of tenure. And somebody who serves in an acting capacity for 18 months does not have security of tenure. And therefore the perception, whether that's played out in reality or not, we can debate, but the perception is that that person may be beholden to outside political influence. And that is why even the Constitutional Court has on occasion commented on the fact that security of tenure is a critical component of independence, and not just of the NDPP, but of the institution as a whole. And that's why the appointment of a permanent head is of such critical importance.